Love, we all need it, we all want it. Let's talk about love, you and me. Hi, I'm Martha Fernandez Sardina, founder and director of RememberYouAreLoved.com. And in this series on love, we have been speaking, well, about love. The love of God, or God who is love. The love that He has for us, the love that we have for Him, that we have for one another, that we should have for ourselves. True love. And as we come toward the end of this series, it is important that we take a look at what St. Paul says about the greatest gifts that God has for us. Would you like a gift? One or more? St. Paul, in the 12th chapter of his letter to the Corinthians, in his first letter, 1 Corinthians 12, speaks about a number of gifts that God gives His people for the upbuilding of the body of Christ and for our own upbuilding in faith. And then he says, right at the end of chapter 12, that we should aspire to the greatest of gifts. And he says that He will show us the way that surpasses all ways. And then St. Paul goes into this great hymn of love that we see in 1 Corinthians 13. If you want to grow in love, if you want to know how to love more, better, purely, selflessly, daily, eternally, like God, I know I do, then we need to take a look at what St. Paul says. Let's take a look actually at what Pope Francis says about what St. Paul says. In his letter on love, the joy of love in family life and relationships, Amoris Laetitia, which is the Latin words for the joy of love and of loving, he says in number 90, that in this lyrical passage of St. Paul, we see some of the features of love. And I'd like to read to you this beautiful hymn of love. St. Paul says, love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous or boastful, it is not arrogant or rude, love does not insist on its own way, it is not irritable or resentful, it does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. You see, love is a magnificent thing. Now, what I'd like to do is substitute the word love for my name. Maybe you will do it with your name. Let's see how that works. Martha is patient. Martha is kind. Martha is not jealous nor boastful. She is not arrogant or rude. Martha does not insist on her own way. She is not irritable or resentful. She rejoices in what is right. She does not rejoice in what is wrong. Martha bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Isn't that beautiful? But is it true? Well, sometimes it is, but not all the time. If you put your name in there, it's probably true many times, but not all the time. So let's take a look at what does it mean to be patient, to be kind, to be enduring. Well, Pope Francis in Numbers 91 and following, all the way through 119, he speaks about these various characteristics of love that each one of us must develop and grow if we want to be true lovers. He says, love is patient. He makes some references to Greek words. Read them, they're enjoyable to memorize. He says that means that we endure all things because we find that we are slow to anger, just like God. When you're patient, like God, you're slow to anger. You don't snap at the first provocation or the first thing that upsets you or that, causes you some kind of offense. He says, we find that the quality of patience in the one who does not act on impulse and avoids giving offense to someone else. He says that we find that quality in the God of the covenant who calls us to imitate Him. That's why St. Paul begins the text by saying that love is patient. Patience is showing mercy toward sinners. And isn't that what God does with us? He shows mercy toward us, and in that there is real power. He goes on to say that patience doesn't mean letting ourselves be trampled upon or mistreated constantly, or it's not tolerating physical abuse or aggression or being used by individuals. We've spoken about that in this series. That is wrong. It is wrong to use and abuse other people. But what he says is that whenever in relationships with other people we find things that are annoying to us, we can actually be patient and we can endure these things. We can cultivate the virtue of patience, finding always an excuse for the other, not an excuse to be angry at the other. He goes on to say, that is why God tells us, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be away from you. Do away with all malice, St. Paul says in Ephesians 4:31. He says, patience takes root in me when I recognize that the other person, that other people have a right to live in the world. Listen to that. Do you recognize that other people have a right to live in the world? It's so interesting to me that Pope Francis would have written that way, because I often say to people just on the streets, in malls, in public places, when I see them really downcast, when I see them that they look like they're fearful of even speaking or doing anything, I say, you know, you have a right to exist. And they light up. Because there are some people who, for whatever reason, have been treated as if they don't have a right to exist, a right to their own space, a right to their own voice. And they do. So I was happy to see Pope Francis point out that patience recognizes that others have a right to live. They have a right to have an opinion. They have a right to exist, and therefore we need to be patient with them. That doesn't mean that we hold back our views, but it does mean that sometimes we do have to hold back maybe a criticism, maybe a word that would lead us to sin against another person. It implies a real deep compassion, accepting the other person as part of this world. Love is patient. Martha is patient. Are you? Number 2 quality that St. Paul talks about is love is at the service of others. Many translations say that love is kind, and that's exactly what that means. The next word that St. Paul uses is used throughout the entire Bible. It's derived from a word that means a good person. A kind person is a good person, one who shows goodness by his deeds, by her deeds. When I'm good to you, I'm being kind. That's what kindness means. It means that we are not taking necessarily a passive attitude toward another, but we're actually accompanying our activity, this dynamic, creative interaction with other people, with a goodness. We're ready to assist other people. We want to extend ourselves to others. And so to love implies to be good. To be good shows that you love. He quotes St. Ignatius of Loyola. The Pope is a Jesuit after all, and St. Ignatius is the founder of the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits. He quotes him as saying, quote, "Love is shown more by deeds than by words. It thus shows, I should say, its fruitfulness, and allows us to experience the happiness of giving, the nobility and grandeur of spending ourselves instinctively without asking to be repaid, purely for the pleasure of giving and serving." Love is kind, love serves. Martha's kind, Martha serves. How about you? Again, I'm playing with my name here. I'm not always kind or serving, but let's make sure that we personalize this and not just speak about love as some thing in the air, some ethereal thing or something that someone else should be responsible for. But let's take responsibility and grow in love. He goes on to talk about what comes next in St. Paul's hymn of love. Love is not jealous. Martha is not jealous. John is not jealous. Maria is not jealous. Put your name in there. He goes on in number 95, Pope Francis in Amoris Laetitia, to talk about the fact that contrary to love is that attitude by which we are jealous or envious, that attitude that leaves no room for other person's good fortune. When something good is happening to someone else, we feel bad about it. We feel envious or jealous. that goes against love, because we should actually rejoice when something good, when someone has a promotion, when someone has an accomplishment, when somebody is in love, when somebody is happy. That's characteristic of love. Love rises above itself. We rise above ourselves when we love, and we don't close ourselves in, which is what envy does. Envy closes us in on ourselves. We're just looking at ourselves. We're just attentive to our own needs, to our own successes and failures. Love expands us, as we have said throughout this series. It does not see the other person as a threat, quite the contrary, as a companion, as someone with whom we share life, and therefore we rejoice in their happiness. In a word, love means fulfilling those two commandments of God's law, which we have seen, to love the Lord our God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. And therefore, those last commandments out of the 10 commandments go directly as a fulfillment of love when the Lord says in the 10 commandments, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or any of your neighbor's goods." Love is not jealous. You don't want what belongs to another. You rejoice in the fact that it belongs to another. You are happy when they are happy, when things are going well for them. Envy has no place in love. Love uproots envy. Love is not boastful, St. Paul says. Let's not be boastful, prideful, centered on ourselves. And the Holy Father, Pope Francis, talks about it in number 97 of Amoris Laetitia. He says that the word used there in Greek for that boastfulness is vainglory. It's that need to be haughty, to be pedantic, to be pushy. Oh, so many times we can be so pushy. We come across people who are pushy, and it really turns us off, doesn't it? Those who love are not pushy, are not pedantic. They don't think of themselves as the best thing on the market, as the best thing since sliced bread, as we have the saying. No, but rather we focus on others. We're not always the center of attention. Love does not draw attention to itself. Love draws attention to the other. We are not boastful. We are actually looking outward to others. Love is not arrogant. It's not puffed up. It's not all about me. Me first, me second, me next. No. Love makes me look outward to others. Love builds up others. Love focuses on others. Instead of being inflated, the only thing that needs to be inflated is my heart, like a big heart-shaped balloon. That's the way our heart should be, just full of love, so that it pours out on others, instead of being boastful and always drawing attention to ourselves. That is the characteristic that we need to develop. And that's why St. Paul also says St. Peter says in his first letter, "Clothe yourselves with humility, for God opposes the proud, and he lifts up the lowly." Love is not boastful. St. Paul goes on to say, love is not rude. And the Holy Father really likes to address this bad habit, this character defect, and he does this in numerous speeches, talking against rudeness. And he says here in Amoris Laetitia in number 99, to love is also to be gentle and thoughtful. And this is conveyed by that next word in Greek that is used. It indicates that love is not rude or impolite. It is not harsh. Its actions, its words, its gestures are pleasing. They're not abrasive. Have you ever come across somebody whose words are just so abrasive? It feels like sandpaper. Shh, shh, shh. Ooh, you know, I have been abrasive many times, and I shouldn't be. Sometimes we're abrasive without realizing it. We need to cut it out. Cut it out. We can't be that way, harsh. Sometimes we are going to point out something that may be better in another or in a situation, but we come across too critical. We need to be more gentle. We need to be more loving. We can't be rude in our speech or in our gestures. Sometimes people pass you by, or you pass someone by, and you just, almost push them over. We can't do that. That's rude. We teach our children not to be rude with other people. We too, as adults, we need to develop the same mind and feelings of others. We need to learn how to listen, to speak, and the Pope says at times to be quiet as well. We need to be able to develop that humility. Otherwise, we're going to be abrasive, and that never helps love. He goes on to say that in our genuine encounter with others, we need to be open. And for that to happen, we have to have a kind look. You have to learn how to look at people differently. Sometimes we go around with a stern look. Or sometimes we say, I love you. Well, inform your face, please, because your face is telling me something other than I love you, I cherish you, you have a right to exist, I'm happy that you exist. We need to have a kind, a tender look, a gaze that recognizes and allows the other person to recognize in themselves their own value. He says a kind look helps us to see beyond our own limitations, to be patient and cooperate with others, despite our differences. Loving kindness, he says, builds bonds, cultivates relationships, creates new networks of integration, and knits a firm social fabric. If we were all more kind and less rude, we would have a better society, despite the differences between us in creed and color, political persuasion, or partisan views. We would be kind to one another, and boy, does our society need that. There's really no room for anything in love but for gentleness and to express that. He goes on to say, along with St. Paul in Numbers 91 and 92, that love is generous. I began saying, would you like a gift? And then I said, how about more than one? Because the Lord wants to shower plenty of gifts upon us. And precisely in that chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians, there is a whole list of gifts. And now in 113, we're talking about that one specific gift of love that has these many manifestations. And love is generous. It pours out. It gives abundantly. And we should be able to pour ourselves out. Or as Pope Francis says, he says here that in this hymn of love, St. Paul talks about the fact that love does not seek its own interest, nor seeks what is its own. And he says that here too we see another passage where St. Paul in Philippians 2:4 says the following, let each of you look out not for his own interests, but also to the interests of others. That's the characteristic of selflessness. The characteristic of selfishness is when I'm only looking out for my interest. What's good for me? What's in it for me? And if there's nothing good in it for me, then I can care less about you. That is contrary to love. That's contrary to generosity. I need to be looking out for me and for you too. Loving ourselves, he says, Pope Francis, is only important as a psychological prerequisite for us to be able to love others. To the degree that I love myself and love myself properly, not less, not more than I ought to, then I will be better equipped to love you. St. Thomas of Aquinas, the great theologian and saint of the Dominican order, says that it is proper to charity to desire to love more than the desire to be loved. Did you catch that? It is proper to charity to love, to have a greater desire to love than to be loved. We see that in that beautiful prayer that is attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, the great founder of the Franciscan order, in which he says, may I want to be love more than to love, to understand more than to understand, to give more than to receive. That's the generosity of love. Imagine if more people, if many more of us were more generous, if we were always looking out for the good of the other. Imagine in family life, if the husband were trying to beat the wife at being loving, if the wife were trying to beat the husband at being loving, if the children were trying to beat each other as siblings to love more, not less, if we were all generous with our neighbors, with our coworkers, with even with strangers, this would be a different world altogether. Love is not irritable or resentful. Now let me stop there for a moment. Do you have some resentments? Are there things in the past, recent past, way, way, way in the past, are there things that really keep you tied and not loving? Let's take a look at this then. And many times we are resentful because we're actually irritable. We get irritated easily. Pope Francis says in number 103 of Amoris Laetitia, reflecting on St. Paul's hymn, he says, St. Paul spoke of the need for a patient that does not immediately react harshly to the weaknesses and the faults of others. The word he uses there is, I can't pronounce these Greek words, you'll have to read them, but the word he uses is one that speaks more of an interior indignation that is provoked by something from without. If you are easily provoked, if you feel indignation at what others say or do, or simply because they exist, then perhaps you have an issue, I have an issue, we have an issue with irritability. Maybe we're just a little too sensitive to other people and immediately we feel provoked, even to violence. He says, it refers to a violent reaction within, a hidden irritation that sets us on edge where others are concerned, as if they were troublesome or threatening and thus needed to be avoided. You find yourself that, I just can't deal with these people. You're always going around, how long do I have to put up with you? Maybe the problem is not them. Maybe the problem is you. Maybe you have an issue with irritation in your heart, and that is something to pray for the grace to resolve, to be healed from. It only causes hurt and alienation, the Pope says. It causes that indignation is actually only healthy when it's a reaction to a grave injustice. If something is gravely, seriously unjust toward you or another, well, then we can be feeling that indignation. But otherwise, it permeates our whole being, and it's very harmful to others. The Lord asks us to make sure that we are much more patient with others. In fact, in Matthew 7, verse 5, Jesus says that we should not be looking at the speck in our brother's, our sister's eye, but at the big old log that is in our own eye. So often, we find other people's faults and failings so humongous, and we think our faults are just so tiny, just tiny little, itsy-bitsy little character defects. Maybe we should reverse it. Maybe we should minimize, reduce, shrink the shortcomings and the failings of others and see ours a little bigger than we think they are, so that we might, with a proper understanding of how our faults and failings get in the way of our loving, so that we might take responsibility and ask the Lord to heal us from those. He says, Pope Francis, that we cannot be angry and be irritated and be resentful, but rather must follow the admonition of St. Paul in his letter to the Ephesians 4, verse 26, when he says, be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. What does that mean? Well, anger is a human reaction. So from time to time, we will feel angry, but do not let it turn into sin. Meaning, do not let your anger turn into a cause not cause you to withdraw your love from another, to withhold your love from another, to be harsh and irritable and resentful toward another, but rather make sure that by the end of the day, you forgive whatever wrongs you think have been committed against you, and you start fresh again. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Do not let the day end without making peace in your family. Do so by asking forgiveness. Do so by giving a look of love. Do so by giving a caress, a show of affection to another. Do so by reconciling. And it's always good to do a good examination of conscience at the end of the day and put before the Lord all the things that we have done wrong, the things that we have failed to do, as we say at every Mass when we make the act of contrition, for our thoughts and our words and the things I've done and the things I've failed to do. Let's fight evil so that we might cultivate love. There's more on St. Paul's hymn of love and on Pope Francis's reflection on it, so we will pick that up in our next episode. Until then, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May He smile upon you and be gracious to you. May He show you His countenance and grant you His peace. And remember, you are loved.
Someone who's used media a lot in evangelization, so I believe in the importance of Catholic radio, Catholic TV, Catholics using the new media. Can I encourage everyone to watch Shalom TV? I think it's a great vehicle of evangelization. And God bless all of you.
Shalom World, God's own channel.